I trapped him into marriage while chasing my ex. Now I'm broke, alone, and pretending I'm the victim. Charlotte sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the diamond ring glinting faintly under the soft glow of her bedside lamp. The apartment she shared with Kevin was quiet, too quiet for a Saturday night. Outside her window, the city lights of Chicago twinkled like distant stars, but they offered no comfort. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who looked tired, older than her 36 years, weighed down by choices she wasn't sure she'd made willingly. Her life had been a series of calculated decisions, or so she told herself. After college, she'd climbed the corporate ladder steadily, earning promotions and accolades. But as the years passed, societal expectations began to creep into her consciousness. Friends from high school were getting married, having children, posting pictures of their perfect lives on social media. Meanwhile, Charlotte's romantic history was riddled with near misses and heartbreaks, none more painful than her breakup with Cameron 5 years ago. Cameron had been everything she thought she wanted: charming, ambitious, and deeply passionate about life. For nearly a decade, they had been inseparable, building dreams together that felt unshakable. Until one day, those dreams shattered without warning. He left, citing irreconcilable differences, though he never elaborated further. She begged him to explain, but he only said, "Sometimes love isn't enough." Those words haunted her still. In the aftermath, Charlotte threw herself into work, determined to prove that she didn't need anyone. Yet loneliness gnawed at her, especially during late nights when the silence pressed too heavily against her chest. That's when Kevin entered her life, a coworker who was dependable, kind, and refreshingly uncomplicated. Unlike Cameron, Kevin didn't sweep her off her feet or ignite fireworks in her soul. Instead, he provided stability, something Charlotte convinced herself she desperately needed. When Kevin proposed 6 months later, Charlotte hesitated. She knew marrying him wasn't about passion or excitement. It was about security. It was about silencing the nagging voice inside her head that whispered she might end up alone if she didn't act quickly. So, she said yes. The wedding itself was beautiful, filled with laughter, champagne, and well wishes from friends and family. But as Charlotte stood beside Kevin, reciting vows she barely remembered writing, her mind drifted back to another man. To Cameron. And then, just hours after the ceremony, while changing out of her wedding dress, she found an old phone buried deep in a drawer. On it was a message thread she hadn't opened in years. The last text from Cameron read, "We can talk again someday." Her stomach churned as guilt washed over her. What had she done? Had she rushed into this marriage because she was afraid of being alone? Or worse, because she was trying to erase the pain of losing Cameron? As the clock struck midnight, marking the official start of her new life, Charlotte realized that fear, not love, had brought her here. And now, trapped in a decision she couldn't undo, she wondered how long she could pretend everything was fine before the cracks began to show. The weeks that followed the wedding passed in a blur of routine and quiet tension. Charlotte's mornings began with the shrill beep of her alarm clock, followed by the ritualistic grind of preparing breakfast, while Kevin scrolled through his emails at the kitchen counter. He was predictable, always choosing oatmeal over eggs, always leaving for work precisely at 7:45 a.m. There was comfort in his consistency, but also an unsettling monotony that gnawed at her. Their apartment, though modern and tastefully decorated, felt more like a hotel room than a home. The walls were bare, save for a few generic prints Kevin had picked out, and the faint scent of furniture polish lingered in every corner. It wasn't what she'd imagined when she dreamed of married life. Where were the cozy Sunday mornings spent lounging in bed? The spontaneous laughter over shared jokes? Instead, there was silence. A heavy, suffocating kind that neither of them seemed willing to break. Charlotte tried to distract herself by keeping busy. She joined a book club, signed up for yoga classes, and even volunteered at a local charity. But no matter how much she filled her schedule, her thoughts kept drifting, back to Cameron. His face haunted her dreams. His voice echoed in her memories. She couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, he was living the life they should have shared together. Her friends noticed the change in her demeanor. Over brunch one Saturday, Clara leaned across the table, her brow furrowed with concern. "You seem off lately," she said, lowering her voice so the others wouldn't hear. "Are you happy, Charlotte?" The question caught her off guard. Happy? Was she supposed to be happy already? Marriage wasn't some magical cure-all. It required effort, compromise, patience. Yet as she forced a smile and nodded, she couldn't help but wonder if happiness was something she'd left behind long before saying, "I do." Clara hesitated, then added cryptically, "Sometimes we make decisions based on fear instead of love. Just don't lose sight of who you really are, okay?" Before Charlotte could respond, Clara changed the subject, steering the conversation toward lighter topics. That evening, as she lay in bed beside Kevin, staring at the ceiling, Charlotte replayed Clara's words in her mind. What did she mean about fear versus love? Did Clara know something she wasn't saying? Her curiosity deepened when, later that week, she received an anonymous email titled Reflections. Inside was a single quote. "A life built on fear is a house of cards." At first, she dismissed it as spam, but then another email arrived the next day, this time with a different message. Regret is the price of settling. Panic bubbled inside her. Who was sending these? And why now? She considered asking Kevin if he'd noticed anything unusual on their shared devices, but something stopped her. Deep down, she feared the answers might lead her somewhere she wasn't ready to go. Determined to regain control, Charlotte decided to take action. On a whim, she logged into LinkedIn under the pretense of updating her profile. As she scrolled, through her connections list, her finger hovered over Cameron's name. They hadn't spoken since the breakup, and part of her wanted to believe he'd vanished from her world entirely. But there he was, his profile picture showing him smiling confidently in front of a city skyline. According to his bio, he'd recently relocated to Chicago for a senior position at a tech startup. Her heart raced. Why hadn't she known he was back in town? Had he reached out to mutual friends? Was he trying to avoid her? Or worse, had he moved on completely? Before she could second-guess herself, Charlotte sent him a brief message. "Congratulations on your new role. Hope all is well." She hit send before she could delete it, immediately regretting her impulsiveness. What was she hoping to achieve? Closure? Redemption? Or simply proof that she still mattered to him? As she closed her laptop and climbed into bed, Charlotte realized that the shadows of her past weren't fading. They were growing darker. And for the first time, she wondered whether running away from them had been the biggest mistake of all. The days following her LinkedIn message to Cameron felt like an eternity. Charlotte checked her inbox obsessively, refreshing the page every few minutes, but there was no reply. She told herself it didn't matter, that reaching out had been a foolish impulse, but the gnawing uncertainty lingered. Had he seen her message? Did he care enough to respond? Her distraction wasn't lost on Kevin. One evening, as they sat across from each other at dinner, he finally broke the silence. "You've been distant lately," he said, his tone measured but tinged with frustration. "Is everything okay?" Charlotte hesitated, her fork hovering over her plate. How could she explain something she didn't fully understand herself? Instead, she offered a vague smile and muttered, "Just work stress. Nothing to worry about." Kevin nodded, though his expression suggested he didn't believe her. But before either of them could say more, the shrill ring of her phone interrupted the moment. It was Clara, inviting her to a networking event downtown the following night. Relieved for the excuse to escape the strained atmosphere at home, Charlotte accepted. The venue was bustling when she arrived, a sleek rooftop lounge overlooking the Chicago skyline. Women in tailored blazers mingled with men in sharp suits, exchanging business cards and animated conversations. Charlotte wandered through the crowd, nursing a glass of white wine while scanning the room absently. She hadn't expected much. These events usually bored her. But then she saw him. Cameron stood near the bar, engaged in conversation with another attendee. He looked different. Older, yes, but also more self-assured. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his posture exuded confidence. For a moment, Charlotte froze, unsure whether to approach him or slip away unnoticed. Before she could decide, their eyes met. For what felt like an eternity, neither of them moved. Then, with a faint smile, Cameron excused himself from his conversation and walked toward her. "Charlotte," he said, his voice warm yet guarded. "I wasn't sure you'd come tonight." "I wasn't sure I'd see you," she admitted, her cheeks flushing. "Congratulations on the new job. You seem happy." He chuckled softly, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "Thanks, life's been good. How about you? Married life treating you well?" The question caught her off guard. She forced a polite smile, nodding slightly. "It's fine. Different than I expected, but fine." Cameron studied her for a moment, his gaze searching. "Different how?" Before she could answer, someone called his name from across the room, interrupting their conversation. He glanced over his shoulder briefly before turning back to her. "Look, I should probably get going, but it was nice seeing you. Really." "Wait," Charlotte blurted, surprising even herself. "Can we talk sometime? Catch up properly?" He hesitated, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "Sure. Let's grab coffee soon. I'll text you." As he walked away, Charlotte noticed something odd, the absence of a wedding ring on his left hand. Earlier, his profile had mentioned being married, so where was it now? The discrepancy nagged at her, planting seeds of doubt that wouldn't let her rest. Later that week, they met at a quiet cafe tucked away in the heart of the city. Over steaming cups of espresso, Cameron opened up about his life since their breakup. Contrary to his LinkedIn bio, he revealed that his marriage had ended 2 years prior. "We tried to make it work," he explained, stirring sugar into his coffee absently. "But ultimately, it wasn't right. We're better off as friends now." Charlotte listened intently, her chest tightening with a mix of relief and regret. When he asked about her decision to marry Kevin, she faltered, unsure how much to reveal. "I thought I needed stability," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But sometimes I wonder if I made a mistake." Cameron leaned forward, his eyes softening. "You deserve to be happy, Charlotte. Just promise me one thing. Don't settle for less than you're worth." His words struck a chord deep within her, forcing her to confront the truth she'd been avoiding. She had settled. Not because Kevin wasn't a good man. He was. But because her choice had been driven by fear rather than love. As they parted ways later that afternoon, Charlotte realized that this encounter wasn't just a chance meeting. It was a reckoning, one that would force her to face the consequences of her decisions head-on. And yet, despite the clarity it brought, she couldn't shake the ache in her chest. Because for all the answers Cameron had given her, one question remained painfully unanswered. Was it too late to fix the mistakes of her past? The days after her coffee meeting with Cameron felt like walking a tightrope. Charlotte oscillated between moments of clarity, realizing how much she had sacrificed for the illusion of security, and waves of guilt over the life she was neglecting with Kevin. Her mind replayed fragments of their conversation, especially Cameron's parting words. Don't settle for less than you're worth. They echoed in her thoughts, both a comfort and a condemnation. At home, the tension between her and Kevin grew palpable. She tried to act normal, engaging in small talk about his day or suggesting they watch a movie together, but her heart wasn't in it. Kevin, ever perceptive, began to notice the distance widening between them. One evening, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, he finally spoke up. "You've changed," he said, his voice tinged with sadness rather than anger. "Ever since we got married, it's like you're not really here, like your mind is somewhere else." Charlotte froze, caught off guard by the raw honesty in his tone. "That's not true," she protested weakly, though even she could hear the lack of conviction in her voice. "It is true," Kevin countered, sitting forward and resting his elbows on his knees. "I know I'm not exciting, okay? I'm not the guy who sweeps you off your feet or makes grand romantic gestures. But I thought what we had was real, wasn't it?" Her throat tightened as tears welled in her eyes. How could she explain that their marriage had been built on shaky ground from the start? That she had chosen him out of fear rather than love? The weight of her deception crushed her chest, making it hard to breathe. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never meant to hurt you." Kevin sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Then why did you marry me, Charlotte? If you didn't love me enough to be present, why did you say yes?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The truth was too painful to admit, not just to him, but to herself. Instead, she turned away, retreating into the safety of silence. That night, they slept on opposite sides of the bed, the space between them feeling wider than ever. Meanwhile, the mysterious emails continued to arrive, each one more pointed than the last. Happiness isn't found in running away. You can't rewrite the past, only learn from it. Charlotte became obsessed with uncovering the sender's identity. She scoured her contacts list, wondering if someone from her past, or worse, someone close to her, was behind them. The paranoia gnawed at her, compounding her already fragile state of mind. One afternoon, while cleaning out her desk drawer, she stumbled upon an old birthday card from Clara. Inside was a handwritten note that read, "Be brave enough to live authentically. You deserve better." A chill ran down her spine. Could Clara be the one sending the emails? It seemed impossible. Her best friend would never intrude so deliberately. But something about the messages felt eerily familiar. Determined to confront her suspicions, Charlotte invited Clara over for dinner under the guise of catching up. As they sipped wine in the kitchen, Charlotte broached the subject carefully. "Have you noticed anything off about me lately?" she asked, watching Clara's expression closely. Clara hesitated, setting her glass down before answering. "Honestly? Yeah. You seem lost, Char. Like you're stuck in this cycle of regret and avoidance. I hate seeing you like this." Charlotte swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. "What if someone told you they made a huge mistake, a life-altering one, and now they don't know how to fix it? What would you say to them?" Clara studied her for a long moment, then leaned back in her chair. "I'd tell them to stop running from the truth. Stop blaming everyone else for their choices. And maybe stop pretending they're the victim when they're actually the architect of their own misery." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. Before Charlotte could respond, Clara reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. With a few taps, she handed it to Charlotte. On the screen was a draft folder filled with unsent emails, the very ones Charlotte had been receiving. "I wrote those," Clara admitted quietly. "I didn't send them directly because I didn't want to attack you, but I couldn't stand by and watch you destroy yourself either. You need to wake up, Char. This isn't about Kevin or Cameron. It's about you." Tears streamed down Charlotte's face as the full weight of her actions crashed down on her. She had spent months blaming everyone else, Kevin for being unexciting, Cameron for leaving, society for pressuring her, when the real culprit was staring back at her in the mirror. For the first time, she saw herself clearly, a woman trapped not by circumstance, but by her own choices. As Clara hugged her tightly, Charlotte realized that the cracks in her marriage weren't just external. They were reflections of the fractures within herself. And until she faced those fractures head-on, there would be no hope of rebuilding anything meaningful. The days that followed Clara's revelation were a blur of introspection and despair. Charlotte spent hours sitting alone in her apartment, staring at the emails Clara had written, each one a mirror reflecting the truths she had been too afraid to confront. The words no longer felt like accusations. Instead, they were lifelines, pulling her toward a reckoning she could no longer avoid. Kevin noticed the change in her demeanor, but misinterpreted it as a sign of reconciliation. He began making small gestures, a bouquet of flowers on the dining table, a note left on her pillow, but Charlotte couldn't bring herself to respond with anything more than forced smiles. She wanted to fix things, to try harder, but deep down, she knew their marriage was beyond repair. It wasn't Kevin's fault. He had done nothing wrong except love her unconditionally when she hadn't been capable of returning that love. One evening, after another strained attempt at conversation, Kevin finally broke the silence. "Is this about him?" he asked, his voice laced with resignation rather than anger. "Cameron?" Charlotte hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "What makes you think that?" "I'm not blind," he said softly, his gaze steady, despite the pain etched into his features. "You've been different ever since you ran into him at that event. I thought maybe it would pass, but now, I don't know if you've ever really let go of him." Her heart sank as guilt overwhelmed her. "It's not fair to blame this all on Cameron," she admitted, her voice trembling. "This isn't about him, or you. It's about me. I married you for the wrong reasons, Kevin. I thought I needed security, someone to save me from being alone. But I didn't realize until now how much I've been running from myself." Kevin nodded slowly, his jaw clenched as though bracing for what came next. "Do you still have feelings for him?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know what I feel anymore. But I do know that staying here, pretending everything's okay, isn't fair to either of us." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Kevin stood up, his expression resolute. "If you need time to figure things out, take it. But if this is goodbye..." His voice cracked slightly, and he paused to compose himself. "Just be honest with me, Charlotte. Don't make this about fear again." Her chest tightened as she watched him walk away, disappearing into the bedroom. Hours later, she found a suitcase packed neatly by the door and a handwritten note resting on top. "Take care of yourself. You deserve happiness, not just the illusion of it." In the weeks that followed, Charlotte threw herself into reconnecting with Cameron, desperate to find some semblance of closure. They met several times, talking late into the night about everything they'd missed over the years, their careers, their dreams, the lives they might have shared. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine a future with him, one where they picked up where they'd left off. But reality soon intervened. During one of their meetings, Cameron admitted something that shattered her hopes completely. "I won't lie, I've thought about us reuniting," he confessed, his tone gentle yet firm. "But we're different people now, Charlotte. And honestly, I'm happy where I am. I've moved on." His words cut deeper than any rejection she'd faced before because they weren't cruel or dismissive. They were truthful. He wasn't the answer to her problems. He never had been. Their relationship had ended not because of fate or circumstance, but because they hadn't been ready to face their own flaws together. As she walked home that night, the weight of her mistakes pressed heavily upon her shoulders. She had destroyed her marriage, alienated her friends, and wasted years chasing an idealized version of love that didn't exist. Worse still, she had convinced herself she was a victim when, in truth, she had been the architect of her own downfall. Then, buried deep in a box of old belongings, she stumbled upon a letter from her mother dated months before her passing. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the yellowed paper, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. "Dear Charlotte, I know life hasn't always been kind to you, but remember this. True strength comes from owning your choices, even the painful ones. Stop seeking validation from others. It will never fill the void inside you. Learn to love yourself first, and everything else will fall into place. With all my love, Mom." Tears streamed down her face as the full impact of her mother's words sank in. For so long, she had blamed everyone else, her exes, her friends, society, for her unhappiness when the real issue lay within herself. She had been living inauthentically, clinging to illusions of perfection while ignoring the person she truly was. That night, as she sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, Charlotte made a decision. She wouldn't run anymore. Instead, she would face the wreckage of her life head-on, piece by painful piece, and rebuild it with honesty and courage. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope, a belief that redemption, though difficult, was possible. Months passed, and Charlotte's life began to transform, not in grand, sweeping gestures, but in quiet, deliberate steps toward healing. The aftermath of her divorce had been brutal. Whispers spread among their mutual friends, some offering sympathy, others judgment. Social media became a minefield she avoided entirely, unwilling to face the curated perfection of lives that seemed so distant from her own fractured reality. Yet, amidst the chaos, she found clarity. She started by confronting the habits that had kept her trapped, her tendency to seek validation from others, her fear of vulnerability, her refusal to acknowledge her role in her own unhappiness. Therapy sessions became a sanctuary where she unpacked years of buried emotions, learning to separate her worth from external approval. Slowly, painfully, she began to rebuild her sense of self. One day, while journaling during a particularly reflective session, an idea sparked within her. What if she could turn her mistakes into something meaningful? Not just for herself, but for others who might be struggling with similar feelings of regret and self-doubt. Inspired, she decided, to create an anonymous blog titled "Chasing Shadows: Lessons from a Life Unlived." At first, the posts were raw and unpolished, fragments of her thoughts, snippets of conversations with Clara, reflections on her failed marriage and lost love. But as weeks turned into months, her writing evolved. She shared stories about the pressures of societal expectations, the illusion of security in relationships, and the courage it took to confront one's deepest fears. Her words resonated deeply with readers, many of whom reached out to thank her for putting into language what they had long felt but couldn't articulate. The blog gained traction unexpectedly, drawing thousands of followers across social platforms. Podcasters invited her to share her story, mental health advocates praised her honesty, and even local news outlets featured her journey. For the first time in years, Charlotte felt seen, not as a victim or a failure, but as someone brave enough to embrace imperfection and grow from it. As her online presence grew, so did her confidence. She reconnected with old passions she'd abandoned years ago: painting, hiking, photography. Each new experience reminded her of the joy that came from living authentically rather than chasing societal ideals. She also mended fences with those she'd heard along the way, including Kevin. Over coffee one afternoon, they spoke candidly about their shared history, both acknowledging the pain they had caused each other, but agreeing that forgiveness was possible. "You're different now," Kevin said with a faint smile. "I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why things happened the way they did, but I'm glad you're finding peace." "Thank you," she replied softly. tears welling in her eyes. That means more than you know. Cameron, too, remained a part of her life, not as a romantic interest, but as a friend who understood her past in ways no one else could. They occasionally met for lunch, exchanging updates about their careers and personal growth. Though their connection would always carry traces of nostalgia, Charlotte no longer clung to it as a lifeline. Instead, she cherished it for what it was, a reminder of how far she had come. By the end of the year, Charlotte moved into a smaller apartment closer to the city center, a cozy space filled with sunlight and plants, decorated with pieces she had painted herself. It wasn't extravagant, but it felt like home in a way her previous life never had. On weekends, she volunteered at a community center, mentoring young women navigating career transitions and personal challenges. Helping others gave her purpose, grounding her in a way her earlier pursuits never had. One crisp autumn morning, she sat on her balcony sipping coffee, watching the sun rise over the Chicago skyline. Her phone buzzed with notifications, a new comment on her latest blog post, a message of gratitude from a reader, but she set it aside, content to simply exist in the moment. For the first time in years, she felt at peace with herself. Charlotte knew her journey wasn't over. There would still be days when doubt crept in, when old wounds resurfaced, but she had learned to face them without fear, armed with the knowledge that happiness wasn't something to be chased. It was something to be cultivated, nurtured, and embraced. As she smiled to herself, the weight of her past finally lifted, replaced by a quiet certainty. She had once been a woman running from shadows, but now she stood in the light, unafraid to cast her own.